Hi, welcome to the Copper Queen Library author series, and tonight we are welcoming Francine Powers, the author of Mirena, Don't Be Afraid, with her new book out from Arcadia Publishing, Haunted Bisbee, which is part of the Haunted America series. Once the world's richest mining site, Bisbee is now one of the most haunted towns in America. From an entity that screams in anguish in Zacatecas Canyon to the glorious woman that floats through a wall in the Schoolhouse Inn, spirits lurk around every corner. A firefighter still haunts his beloved Bisbee Fire Station No. 2, saving lives even after death, while a vengeful apparition keeps guard over his family plot at Evergreen Cemetery. Copper mining might have faded, but the memories of those drawn to Bisbee live on. Join Francine Powers, award-winning journalist, author, and paranormal historian, as she uncovers the truth behind the old ghost stories of her beloved hometown. And welcome, Francine. We are so happy to have you here tonight and to hear some stories from your book.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to do a little reading on some of the sites in my book. I am a Bisbee native. I was born and raised in Bisbee. My father was a miner, my grandfather, some of my uncles. I went to all the schools in Bisbee, and I did publish my first book back in 2004 about growing up with the paranormal and growing up in my hometown of Bisbee. And now I have a new book out called Haunted Bisbee, and I guess I'll go ahead and begin my reading. I hope you enjoy it. Spirit-Laden House. At Upper Tombstone Canyon, you would find gorgeous, tall cottonwood trees and cool, fresh, blowing air through the branches and leaves. During monsoon season, you might hear a light rush of running water in the deep ditches. Near the turnoff to Highway 80, and at the end of another narrow and extremely steep road, stands an original Bisbee house. This structure originally built around 1890 and has been home to only a handful of families. Another house was built in 1928 on the same site. This is my childhood home. Among the first people to live there was a couple. They were from different parts of the country and married in 1906 in Bisbee. She was from South Carolina. He had recently migrated to Colorado. The two corresponded for a year until they met in Arizona. The 30-something woman traveled to Bisbee by train to meet her soon-to-be groom, who was a miner. The two had a lovely life and 5 children, but stayed in the house for only a few years before relocating. My parents bought the house in the late 1960s. It was the first place I lived and the first place I experienced life with the supernatural. At the time of the home's paranormal height of activity, I was entering the 1st grade. I had 3 older sisters and 1 brother at the time. My 2 eldest sisters are identical twins. The Ouija board was very popular in the early 1970s, and the twins decided to get their hands on it. Almost simultaneously, the paranormal occurrences began. When my mother found out, she took that game board and went outside and broke it on her knee. That didn't seem to stop the haunting. Footsteps from different parts of the house were heard in the middle of the night, and the lights would flicker on and off at unexpected moments. One of my sisters said she was watching TV and in the reflection of its screen saw a figure walk behind her when no one else is in the room. She saw puffs of cigarette smoke appearing out of thin air. My father said he heard a ball bouncing in my bedroom. He went to scold the person he thought was playing with it, me, but no one was there. Another sister claimed she had heard our mother washing dishes and yelled to her for water. When Mom didn't answer, she checked on her. No one was at the sink doing such a chore. Various situations were happening at the house every day and night. I experienced the haunting, but in a more personal way. I felt a warm and sweet connection with the spirit. At times, I could hear a younger woman sing. Her voice was pleasant. She was always near. But there was another entity in the home. He was an angry, jealous, and violent male presence. I didn't like him and was terrified when I felt his company. One night, I awoke to a slender figure at the side of my bed. I called out the names of my two teenage twin sisters. The figure moved from the side of my bed and stood behind a lampshade on a nearby nightstand. The figure did not exert any negative vibrations. What? I asked. The figure's long, tapered fingers clung to the lampshade as her head turned side to side. She seemed as confused as me. I watched her move and could hear her hard shoes on the wood floor. She took a few steps back and the floor creaked. She moved into the moonlight from our open bedroom window. The curtains were billowing behind her. Suddenly, I could see all of her. Her hair was in a tight bun held by a large comb. Her eyes were gentle. She had on a long sleeve blouse with the collar up to her neck, hiding every inch of her skin. She had a tiny waist and wore a long skirt reaching down to her laced up ankle boots. She was lovely. I realized it wasn't one of my sisters and put my head on my pillow without breaking our gaze. Then she took 2 more steps back and put her hands in a praying position. She bowed her head, then penetrated the floor, gliding down and out of sight. The other ghosts made appearances in much more dramatic ways. During a dinner, our 5 dogs started to bark and howl outside. Then suddenly, the sound of tin cans being dragged around the house erupted. We all stared at one another in shock. Then above our heads in the attic were the sounds of a physical fist fight. My father got up from the dinner table and went directly to the door that leads to the attic. He yelled up the steep set of stairs, "Who's there?" There was no answer, and the brawl stopped. My parents decided to call the local priest the next day. Reverend Gilbert Padilla was a priest from a Roman Catholic church, St. Patrick's. He served in the church from 1970 to 1976. He came to do a house blessing. During that afternoon visit, he went to each room and threw holy water as he recited prayers of protection and for the release of any suppressed spirit residing there. He gave Holy Communion to my parents and blessed the children individually. This made things calm for a little while, but not completely. My mother was taking an afternoon nap and woke up to an eyeless face floating on her bedroom wall. This caused my parents to call Father Padilla for another house blessing. He was not available, so the diocese set up a substitute. The next day, Reverend Thomas D. Rice, who would later serve at St. Patrick's Church from 1971 to 1981, arrived. In no more than mere moments later, the sound of another fight started in the attic. The priest asked how to get up there. My father led him to the attic door. He opened it for him, and Father Rice made the sign of the cross and went up the stairs as my father followed. The priest began to pray. As he got to the 3rd step from the top, he stopped, and his voice grew louder. He turned and extended his arm to my father to halt. The priest's blood seemed to drain from his face. When he reached the top, he looked like he was going to faint. He mustered his courage and took a few steps into the attic. The fighting stopped. The priest turned toward the stairs and hurried to exit. Suddenly, he was pushed and flew toward all of us at the bottom of the stairs. He fell into the wall and collapsed on the steps. After that, Father Rice said he was going to recommend a special mass for further protection for our family and was going to meet with Father Padilla on his return. I will discuss what has happened with the urgency of the situation, and I'm also going to recommend an exorcism, said the priest to my parents. As an adult in the late 1990s, I interviewed Reverend Stanley J. Nadamli, who was St. Patrick's pastor at the time. Father Nadamli said that since his arrival, he had performed about 12 house blessings in Bisbee, but denied ever witnessing an exorcism during his service there. The priest explained that the bishop from the diocese must have permission for an exorcism to take place. There are appointed exorcists to perform the solemn rituals called major exorcism and simple exorcism to drive out evil spirits in the name of the church. Father Nadamli explained that spirits do not possess homes or objects because they have no souls. Exorcism is meant to drive out demons or dark spirits from the bodies and souls of the living and has a lingering outcome of houses and sites where paranormal sightings have occurred. The Bisbee priest said, a major exorcism is the express purpose of exorcising diabolical spirits from the body of a man. He added that the exorcists who entered our home may have read a simple exorcism to free our family of the entities. The bishop from the Tucson diocese approved the religious event, and it did take place in the house, on the hill, and up Tombstone Canyon. It began with a mass in our living room. The officiant was positioned near the floor heater that had earlier been tagged as some sort of vortex. As the priest recited his sermon, I began to hear her sing again, ever so faintly. The priest said, "I will recite the words of this prayer and walk through each room of the house as I bless each corner with holy water. Each of you will follow me behind. Fear nothing, for Christ is here." As the Reverend walked, I noticed he had a crucifix placed in the seam of his book. As he began to whip holy water from his silver scepter, I also heard a quiet wind begin to blow. As he walked through the kitchen, a slamming door echoed through the house. He paused, then continued to the next room. The house seemed to tremble, and now I could hear wind howling in my ear. The priest stopped in different places along his route and read louder. The windows in my parents' bedroom began to vibrate, then shake. He ignored the dramatic scene and continued to walk through the house. We reached the living room again, and he stopped dead in his tracks as the laundry room door whipped open and slammed shut. The holy man grabbed the doorknob of the swinging door and entered the room. At this point, our dogs were howling and whimpering outside. Inside the room, a man's deep voice recited obscenities. The priest spread holy water in every corner of the room simultaneously. The ritual seemed to be at its peak, and just when I thought I couldn't bear it another moment, everything ceased. After the purification of our house, the odd noises and haunting occurrences seemed to end. At least we hope they did. Today, approximately 45 years later, continuous paranormal incidents have occurred in that house. It has been reported that sounds of a radio will play when a person approaches the house, even though there's no electricity hooked up. Others have heard banging come from within the house, as well as a man screaming. Several photographs have captured a woman dressed in turn of the 20th century clothes on the porch and in front of the windows. Some have claimed to hear a deep growling noise from the front yard. Several pictures have captured up to 10 floating faces on the front porch and a shadow creature in a hooded cloak on the street in front of the house. The exorcism may have calmed the spirits, but it did not close the vortex located at the heart of the house. My mother may have unknowingly left the opening to the other side, but not correctly sealing the vortex opened by the Ouija board and making this spirit-laden home the most haunted house in Bisbee. On to the next site. We're going to go to the Bisbee Restoration Museum. At 37 Main Street, a gorgeous 3-story building with a large basement stands with original signage cemented above the doorway. This building used to be the location of the Fair Store and is now home to the Bisbee Restoration Museum. The original building was severely damaged during the Great 1908 Bisbee fire. In fact, one of the Fair Store owners, Sam Freckenberg, was among the first witnesses of the fire, which started at the original Grand Hotel only a few doorways up the street. An estimated $300,000 in stock and warehouse goods were lost at the store as well as the building itself. A grand opening of the new store took place in November of 1909. Sam's brother, Ben Frankenberg, began the Fair Store in a tiny room on Brewery Avenue. Only 15 by 20 square feet, the business soon outgrew the space. Ben moved into a large structure then known as the Costello Building on Main Street. The store had a selection of clothing, hats, and shoes for women, men, and children. Sam managed the men's department and carpets. He would go on 3-week excursions to Chicago and New York to find the finest material for sewing and the latest fashion for clothing, hats, and shoes. Ben would go on the same type of trips as well. As the years went by, the Fair Store kept up with the times. At one point, it had a whole slew of seamstresses and tailors for all customers. They wanted to make sure everyone was custom fitted and satisfied with their purchase. The owners of the fair were respected in the community and of high stature in society. Keeping up with the reputation of being fair went a long way for the business and for the individuals who ran it until 1928. After that, the building housed various types of businesses. It was a women's clothing store, a dry goods store, and a Western auto store. By 1968, the building had been donated by the Frankenberg and Newman families to the Restoration Council of Bisbee and instantly turned into the museum it is today. During the time of my tour business, I was able to ghost hunt in various Bisbee buildings. The Ferris Store building was one of them. I worked closely with the volunteers at the Bisbee Restoration Museum and learned from a couple of volunteers that there was a resident ghost and that it had shown itself on different occasions. A volunteer said that she had seen an apparition of a woman on the second floor. Another staff member said that she heard various noises on the same floor and sometimes near the sewing machines, at times when she knew she was the only person in the building. She also stated that she heard a phantom-type woman's voice saying something faintly many times after she unlocked the front door before the museum opened. On my birthday a few years ago, 3 of us, after hours and at night, were able to meet and seek out the ghost at the museum. This was an investigation before a paranormal event in collaboration with the museum to be held later that month, which included 3 successful seances. During our ghost hunt, we took several photos, and as I went, I made recordings. At times, a disembodied female voice was recorded. We settled down on the large mezzanine behind the first and second floors, sitting on the same chairs with the lights off. We began to ask the resident ghost a slew of questions. We then asked her to tap somewhere in the building to answer yes. She did, near the antique sewing machines displayed in the museum. We told her we would recite the alphabet and asked her to tap when we got to the letters in her name. By the end of that session, she communicated, Elena. Did you work in the Ferris store? She tapped. She offered no response to having the position of a shop girl, clerk, or sales lady, but indicated yes to a seamstress. We asked her if she recognized the individuals there that night. She tapped yes to the staff members, but no to me. We asked if the ghost knew Ben Frankenberg, and she said yes. She also said she was not alone in the building. She had a son with her. Through more questions, we understood that she was in her 30s and had brought her young son to work, which made her happy. She also confessed that in present times, her son moves things around in the museum as a way of playing some sort of game with members of the staff. We stopped asking questions because we didn't seem to get any more responses. Spirits who communicate with the living get tired quickly. As we sat in silence, suddenly quick, short steps went from one side of the second floor above us to the other. The sound was coming from hard-soled shoes in petite strides. I whispered loudly and said to the others, "Do you hear that?" They nodded they did. That was the last oddity that took place that evening. During the 3 seances I held at the museum, the female ghost kindly obliged and made herself known to several people attending the 3-day event. When I asked her to make noises to respond to my several questions and questions asked by our tour guests, noises were heard near the sewing machines on the second floor where we were set up. Several guests and I said we heard footsteps around the large room as we continued the event. She was a highly active ghost, and it was an incredible experience to bear witness to. If you have the fortune of visiting the Bisbee Restoration Museum on Bisbee's Main Street, you might run into a young seamstress from a time when Bisbee was at its finest, and run into a little boy who may be lurking behind a counter, ready to play a game of hide and seek. Now we're going to head down to Broadway Avenue. There is a remarkable stairway leading up from Brewery Avenue to an alley at the rear of the Central School building that is named Broadway Avenue. When it was constructed, it looked more like a boardwalk. Sometime in its existence, concrete steps replaced the wood planks. Regardless of that, it pretty much looks as it did over 100 years ago. In my paranormal journal from 2004, Mirena Don't Be Afraid, I wrote about this site. and my unique experience there. Here's an excerpt. As a young girl in the late 70s, Prairie Gulch was a lot more suitable for families to live in. Saloons were still there, but now called bars, and gambling and a red light district was no longer legal. By the end of the school day, I would forget the uneasy time of night by enjoying the sunlight of the afternoon during the bus ride home after a full day of 6th grade. I would step off the school bus at the Lyric Theater stop and begin my walk home through several shortcuts. Instead of walking through the gulch to get home, I was not allowed to pass St. Elmo's bar situated in the middle of the street. I had to literally walk around the neighborhood. I would walk to the Copper Queen Hotel's plaza, back to the pool, and out the back gate. Beyond the hotel's fence is an alley leading up to a set of stairs that finished with the road to my house. In between the hotel and the staircase are another set of stairs called Broadway steps that lead down into Prairie Gulch. After arriving home from a late Saturday matinee at the Lyric, I interrupted a private conversation between my mother and her friend. My mother asked me to go outside and said she needed the privacy. Well, I decided to take a walk. As I left my front porch, I noticed the desert sky turning to the glow of orange, purple, and sorbet pink. These were the colors of low but energizing cosmic energy. I headed toward the place where I found complacency. That sweet place was the Broadway Stairway. The stairs are ancient and produce an incredible amount of vitality from its existing past, plagued with energies from those who have traveled its path. As I made my journey toward my spot, I began to take in the sweet smells of the trumpet, honeysuckle vines growing on most of the chain link fences of small houses that line Taylor Avenue. To get to my destination, I had to take another set of cement steps that were steep into the left side of Central School. As I descended the stairs, my stomach tightened and my fingers began to tingle. As soon as I caught the first glimpse of my favorite spot, I began to jog toward it. When I got to the top of the staircase, I stood on the first step for a few seconds before stepping down more. The sun was still shining down through the thick branches of trees and pomegranate bushes lining the side of the stairway, causing the cement to glimmer and shine. As I strolled down the stairs, I began to smile. I happily tugged at the leaves brushing my head and found a spot to sit down. I closed my eyes and began to meditate. Almost immediately, I felt a breeze around me. The dead leaves scattered on the surrounding ground began to slide and hop toward each other, making scratching noises on the concrete. The dry material gained momentum in the gentle wind. As the breeze took strength, I opened my eyes to the small cyclone of leaves twirling in midair. Just then, the essence of a light perfume became evident and intensified as each motion of the spiral of dead leaves took speed. I wasn't frightened at first, but my senses were filled with the energy of several presences. They were of young women whose voices began to whisper. I couldn't understand their words, but could hear all the different tones of voices. I asked them who was there and what did they want. The sound of soft whispers grew to an ear-cracking volume, accompanied with numerous pairs of feet shuffling around the stairs, positioning themselves completely around me. The entities executed depressed emotions, bringing me to tears. That is when I closed my eyes and vivid pictures of each entity were etched into my thoughts and soul. I saw a small and fair-skinned Mexican woman wearing an off-white underwear-looking linen material with a tight bodice covering her tiny waist. She was whispering, "Help me." There was a chubby blonde who appeared to be middle-aged and wrinkled. Lastly, there was a third. She was beautiful. Her long, dark, and wavy hair was pulled back with oversized silver hair combs. In a sudden and astonishing moment, a feeling of holy terror rang through my bones. Screeches of blood-curdling screams forced me to cover my ears as jolts of pain shot through them. The echo of shrieks from the female apparitions suppressed extreme anxiety, slinging the spirits together into one large white cluster of fog that zipped quickly up to the top of the steps. with the poignant screams following closely behind. The ball and mist shifted into the left of the stairway and disappeared, leaving a haunting silence in its place. Now we're going to go down to the Lowell area of Bisbee, and I'm going to read about Evergreen Cemetery and the vengeful ghost keeping guard. Evergreen Cemetery has a special place in the hearts of Bisbee families whose loved ones have been laid to rest there, where the hallowed grounds are sacred and cherished with grief and love. This 40-plus acre cemetery is where the bodies from the old cemetery in Brewery Gulch were transferred. It was officially established on May 3rd, 1912. There are many gorgeous tombstones, more like monuments, at the gravesites of Bisbee pioneers. There are also mausoleums for the influential families who settled the community. Of the cemetery space, 60% is allocated to the several fraternal and private organizations that used to thrive in Bisbee. There is a special section for war veterans and a large religious area. There is also a high number of unmarked graves at the cemetery. Evidence of the individuals who may have traveled to Bisbee from distant countries with no kin to gift them with a deserved marker, or persons who were alone in life and in death. In the older section of Evergreen Cemetery is a plot that is haunted by a ghost of a man who, for the vengeance of the death of his young daughter, shot and killed a man who he thought was to blame. William C. Green shot James C. Burnett on Allen Street in Tombstone and was later acquitted of murder charges. The Green family was a substantial part of Cochise County history. Ella Robert Green's past has been chronicled in two different ways. Some write that she was a widow of William M. Mosen from California. Others say she divorced the father of her son and daughter in 1880. At that time, she joined her brother, Ed Roberts, and his family, then moved to Oregon. Shortly after, they all moved to Arizona with a herd of horses. Ella sailed along the San Pedro River and created the O.R. Ranch, which also housed her large herd of steer. Shortly after, she met her future husband, a miner with a nickname, Colonel William Cordell Green, although he was never in the military. They married in Tombstone in 1884. Ella was irrigating over 100 acres of bottom land and had dammed the San Pedro River. One sad day, tragedy struck. The couple's 10-year-old daughter, also named Ella, and her friend Katie Cochran were swimming in the San Pedro River below the family dam on June 25, 1897. Swimming there was something they did often. On this day, the two girls jumped into the water without hesitation. At that moment, a crushing rush of water pushed them down, and both were drowned. Unbeknownst to them, Burnett had blasted the Green Dam with dynamite that day. For several years before the tragedy, the two men had many controversies and arguments over water lawsuits. There were reports 3 years before the incident that Burnett threatened to kill Colonel Green, the first chance he got. After the death of his daughter, Green offered $1,000 for information on who blew up his dam. At 1 p.m. on July 1st, 1897 on Allen Street and near the OK Corral stables, Green's gun expelled 3 rounds, killing Burnett. Witnesses reported that Burnett's body faced downward in a pool of blood. When his body was turned over, blood spurted from the gunshot wound in his chest. Colonel Green was arrested at this site and taken to jail. A reporter from the Prospector went to the sheriff's office just a few minutes after the shooting and took a statement from the killer. This is an excerpt of Green's statement from the newspaper article in the Graham Guardian dated July 9, 1897. I have no statement to make other than that man was the cause of my child being drowned. I am certain beyond the shadow of a doubt that he was the guilty man. And when I thought of my little girl as she put her arms around my neck on the day she drowned, I could think of nothing but vengeance on the man who caused her death. I have lived in this territory 25 years and have always been a peaceful, law-abiding man. I held no animosity and have no regret for anything except the death of my little girl and the little Cochran girl and the grief of my poor wife. He added, "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord." Greene had public sympathy in his favor. Friends and bondsmen rushed to pay for his bond set at $30,000. His trial was short as several witnesses came forward to testify against Burnett, setting Greene for murder charges. There was an agreement of some kind between Greene and the city of Bisbee at the time of his wife's death in December of 1899. Greene agreed to fence Evergreen Cemetery if the city promised to keep up his family plot for as long as the cemetery existed. No known agreement was ever found, but according to a 2003 article in the Bisbee Observer, documents were found that seemed to match the perpetual care promise. There were reports to the city council from 1917 through 1933 of the Greene plot's condition. These included one dated July 1917 that the fence around Mrs. W.C. Greene's plot was painted and grass cut twice. Another report from June 1919 stated that the grave of Mrs. W.C. Greene had been cleaned up. In November of 1923, the Greene plot was cleaned. In September of 1932, it was reported that the Greene plot was looking very lovely. In September of 1932, it was said that the Greene plot was looking nice for Memorial Day. During 1965, a first-class job had been done on the Greene plot. There were no more entries on record regarding the upkeep of the family plot after that year. As mentioned before, Evergreen is a much-loved site and is often visited by busy residents at different times of the day. There have been reports of a white fog surrounding the Greene plot on sunshine-filled days. There have been reports of the sound of hard footsteps of one person marching on the pavement near the plot. As stated earlier, Lowell's School stands across from the cemetery. Over the decades, there have been several accounts of lights being seen at night there. Students arriving from long distance away games have said they see eerie lights floating over graves in the cemetery, in particular in the vicinity of the Greene plot. Individuals visiting the cemetery have witnessed, usually from a distance from the family plot, an apparition of a man walking around it. When the gravesite is approached, the man disappears. The family plot where the hauntings take place has a tall monument marking the grave for the young Ella. Next to her is her mother's large headstone. There is another grave marker on the ground that reads Greene, and a few feet away, a bird sculpture resembling a dove on a square stone block. Colonel Greene died in 1911 and is buried in Cananea, Mexico. Colonel Greene's ghost may be haunting the cemetery plot during the time the city isn't maintaining it and is nowhere to be seen when it is. Well, I hope you enjoyed some of the reading of my book, Haunted Bisbee, and it is available now, and you can find it anywhere online.
Thank you, Francine, for reading to us on this dark and chilly and windy night at this time of the year when different celebrations throughout the ages, from Samhain and All Hallows Eve to El Dia de los Muertos, this time of bringing the harvest in and preparing for the dark time of the year when the veils are lifted and become thin between the two worlds. I think it is really important to honor our dead as well as the living.
Yes, I completely agree. And that's how I really kept in mind when I was writing this book to make sure the history of the sites that I talked about or wrote about, people who have passed away, who died, and who may be haunting those sites, and what you just said, in respect and gratitude for their life, and what we may see when we cross over.
Well, we really thank you for being here, and Haunted Bisbee is also available at the Copper Queen Library, as well as from Arcadia Publishing and at local venues. So thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.